Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT Top 10 video. Today's video will be a countdown of the top artifacts for patch 11.6. We'll be breaking down what makes each artifact useful in the current meta, or in some cases, not so useful. Keep in mind that since you can't control which artifact you get, that you should take these rankings with a grain of salt, as at the end of the day, you're going to get whatever artifact is dropped. With all that said, let's go ahead and dive on in. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. Kicking off our top 10, we have Rocketpropelled Fist coming in as the number 10 artifact. Out of every available artifact, it's pretty clear that Rocketpropelled Fist is the worst. If there were more than 10 artifacts, this item likely wouldn't even be an honorable mention. That's just how mediocre it is. This may seem like a harsh criticism considering how valuable Blitzcrank has been in previous sets. Being able to pull an enemy champion out of position and forcing other players to position around your positioning was great. But Rocketpropelled Fist is not Blitzcrank, and Aatrox already does its job better. There's one main issue with this artifact in that it doesn't function nearly as well as Blitzcrank did. There's weird interactions with it when it pulls a unit and doesn't quite have the same punch that Blitzcrank did. For example, if you Zephyr a unit in the quarter and try to manipulate the pull target to another champion, it straight up just doesn't work. The lack of nuance makes it much weaker overall than just having an Aatrox. Putting the negatives aside, there is still some value in having this artifact since it does pull in and stun a champion, but it's definitely the weakest of the bunch. Let's move on to the number 9 artifact on today's list, Randuin Sanctum. Now we've moved into artifacts that provide clear value, as Randuin provides 40 armor and magic resistance to all allies adjacent to the unit holding it. And this bonus lasts the whole round of combat, which is great. That said, there is a clear issue with this artifact. That issue is positioning. Since it only affects allies adjacent to the champion holding it, to get the most value out of it, you need to clump up around that champion. Doing so tends to put you at a positioning disadvantage, especially against any boards with strong AoE. Now, this isn't the only effect in the game that promotes clumping, since there are traits like Keeper or compositions like Cultist that want to be clumped. In those cases, Randuin is amazing because it enhances a playstyle that already functions around the idea of clumping. But for most other compositions, you need to be flexible with your positioning, and oftentimes being clumped is a negative. This is a bit nitpicky because at the end of the day, you can get by with just having Randuins provide the buff to only 1 or 2 units. It will get less valuable, but you won't have to sacrifice positioning. Still, if this artifact was easier to position around, the inherent value it brings would go up significantly. Up next is Xingyas Paradox as the number 8 artifact. This is where ranking each artifact ends up being difficult because most of them bring value in specific ways. Xingya basically functions similar to a Guardian Angel or Zillion ult by preventing the champion from dying once. Of course, in Xingya's case, it's slightly different as the effect procs when the unit would drop below 40% health, and they're still active on the board during the period of invulnerability. But that does bring us to the main issue of Xingya's, the fact that it's very similar to Guardian Angel. Since we can never really play around having this artifact specifically, it's much more likely that a player will have placed Guardian Angel on their important champion, generally a carry, so it'd be pointless to also have Xingyas on them. The lack of control over having a Xingyas is a huge downside, since it's the type of item that you would like to plan around if possible. The other downside to Xingyas, which isn't too big of an issue but worth noting, is that the stats it provides aren't amazing. The 25 armor and magic resist is nice, but 15 AP is pretty lackluster for a defensive item. If it also provided health or maybe even mana instead, it would likely place higher on the list. At the end of the day, Xingyas would be much better if you could plan around having it, but the randomness of artifact drops means it has a much lower value overall. Moving right along, we've got Manazane coming in at number 7. Manazane went from being one of the worst in the game to being relatively valuable depending on your board and champions. Previously, it returned mana over a longer period of time, whereas now it happens over the course of 4 seconds. This means that for the champion that has it, after they cast, their second cast will come much faster. There's plenty of champions where this is valuable. A few examples include Lee Sin, Zillion, Sejuani, and most mage champions. Generally, if a champion has a large mana pool, their spell has a lot of impact during a fight, so being able to cast it a second time much faster is great. As for why it's not lower on the list, mainly it's because it doesn't provide nearly as much value as some of the other artifacts. Yes, it is great on specific champions, but the overall stats it provides are minimal. Honestly, it'd be much better of an artifact if it provided more than just 15 mana or had AP as one of the bonus stats instead of AD. Overall, it's in a much better place than it used to be, so having Manazane is usually a net positive. Next is our first damage-focused item, Obsidian Cleaver, which comes in at number 6. Of the items that provide damage stats during combat, Obsidian Cleaver is the weakest. That's not to say that the artifact is bad, just that the value it brings is much lower than, say, Collector or Infinity Force. The reason for this is that the armor and magic resist shred of Obsidian Cleaver is hard to get value from in most compositions. Sure, it's great on a specific champion like Olaf with his cleave or Samira with her AoE, but it's really not the type of item that you want on your main damage dealer. Ideally, you want it on a secondary carry or a unit that does consistent AoE to proc the effect. The other issue with Obsidian Cleaver is that Last Whisper exists and is a commonly used item in the meta. Champions that would do well with Obsidian Cleaver also do well with Last Whisper, and since you're already likely to have a Last Whisper, you won't get anywhere near as much value from having the Cleaver. Basically, it's a good artifact to have, but since you can't count on having it every game, it's overshadowed by Last Whisper. And in compositions where you may not have Last Whisper, you won't have many champions that can use it well. Switching back to defensive artifacts, let's talk about the number 5 artifact on the list, Death's Defiance. Death's Defiance is one of the more interesting artifacts as the defensive value it brings can be difficult to measure. Since it's taking 60% of the incoming damage and dealing as damage over time, it can be hard to tell exactly how much it is actually doing compared to Xingyas, where you can tell exactly when it's being useful. Essentially, the best way to think of Death's Defiance is that it slows down how quickly a unit dies. That means it's fantastic for hard-to-kill champions or when you can heal that champion. Swain, for example, is great with Death's Defiance since it drastically reduces incoming damage that he can then heal over time with his ultimate. Slayers in general also do well with it since they have inherent healing built into them. Overall, there's really nothing to complain about for this artifact, as the only potential problem is that it could provide slightly better stats. Being defensive in nature, if it had health instead of attack speed or attack damage, it would be even better. That's being nitpicky for an artifact that already has a powerful effect. Next up, we have Anima Vignette as the number 4 artifact. Oh yes, this is a really fun artifact to play around with. Anima Vignette turns a champion into a raid boss, as healing 8% of its maximum health each second is a lot of regen. Of course, this does mean you want champions with high health pools, so in that regard, there is somewhat of a limit on which champions you can give it to. But any high health champion is great with it, as well as any unit that's inherently hard to kill like a Vanguard or even Shen with a shield. There's 2 examples that come to mind for Anima Vignette. First, and the most obvious, is giving it to a brawler, especially a unit like Shyvana. Shyvana is fantastic with Anima since her health is already being boosted by Brawler trait, and she gains more health when she transforms. Slap an Anima onto her and enjoy watching her health increase when taking damage. The other example is Swain, as he also gains a lot of health after transforming. Plus, he's already going to be healing, so additional regen helps even more. We're also in a late game focused meta, meaning hitting Swain is not all that difficult to do. Of course, Anima Vignette isn't perfect since healing reduction should also work against it. But all in all, it's one of the best defensive artifacts in the right situation. We're moving into our top 3 now. For that, we have Gold Collector coming in at number 3. Originally when set 4.5 came out, Gold Collector did not seem all that appealing of an item since units down to 10 health are likely to die soon after anyway. But now that the meta has developed and players know what works and what doesn't, it's pretty obvious that Gold Collector is really good. While 10% is not a lot of health, being able to instantly kill a champion even low on health can often be the difference between winning a round and losing it. And the execute is even better depending on what champion the artifact goes to. Slayers in general are really good with it, as Olaf can cleave, Tryndamere has a lot of mobility, and Samira does AoE. Other units to consider giving it to are Assassins, since it's got a built-in increased critical strike chance and 30 attack damage. Overall, this artifact shows just how potent having an execute can be. Moving along to the number 2 artifact, we have Infinity Force. First off, we were wrong when we originally rated each Ornn artifact at the beginning of set 4.5. It seemed like at the time that since Infinity Force only provided increased stats and nothing else, it wasn't going to be that valuable of an artifact compared to ones with seemingly powerful effects. But we definitely missed the mark on how valuable those stats are. Basically, any champion that you give Infinity Force to is going to gain a ton of useful stats. Specifically, it's great on a lot of carries because it provides attack damage, attack speed, critical strike, and ability power. It also gives defensive stats with armor, magic resist, and a little bit of health. The only missing element here is mana, which does feel oddly left out on a lot of the Ornn artifacts. In any case, Infinity Force is by far the best artifact in the game if we're talking about just stat bumps. But speaking of the best artifact in the game, we move on to our number 1 artifact, Eternal Winter. We're going to preface this by saying Eternal Winter did just receive another substantial nerf in 11.6 that may lower its overall value below that of Infinity Force. Infinity Force already provides far more stats than Eternal Winter, but we're still giving the advantage over to Eternal Winter because its effect is absolutely overpowered. The largest reason as to why Eternal Winter consistently gets talked about as the best artifact is the fact that the effect it provides says it occurs from any damage. That means that a champion doesn't just have to be targeting the wearer of Eternal Winter, just any damage that they will do will slow them. So a unit that does AoE can absolutely be wrecked by Eternal Winter without ever even targeting the champion wearing it. And of course, the Frozen effect is quite powerful as well. All around, there's really no complaints about this artifact other than the fact that it's still much better than almost every other artifact besides Infinity Force. It really wouldn't be that much of a surprise to see it nerfed again in the future. Alright, that's all we have for you for today, folks. Ornn's artifacts introduce a whole new layer to the late game strategy in TFT that has been really fun to explore. If they ever bring back similar mechanics in a future set, we hope it's slightly more balanced so that each artifact feels as powerful as another. Let us know in the comment section below which artifact is your favorite to play. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.